and secular rationalists, atheists, nihilists will tend to be more antinatalist.
This is a fascinating video, but there's one point you made that I think needs some sort of realignment. Antinatalism is not equivalent to nihilism. They're actually quite opposite in certain ways. So if nihilism is the rejection of any moral framework, to say that life is meaningless, antinatalism is the opposite in the sense that it says that suffering is the source of all meaning in the universe, and it is so important that you should realize that you have a responsibility to prevent the potential of suffering where you can. And obviously the main way you can prevent a new vector of potential suffering in the universe is to not create a new sentient being. So antinatalism is saying that we value so highly this, the fragility of sentient experience, the vulnerability of sentient experience, the capacity for a sentient creature to suffer is so important that you should not take that risk that you might thrust a new sentient being into this risk equation where there is the potential for great suffering. And of course it's an asymmetrical equation as well. So because if you don't create somebody, you're not disadvantaging anybody. There's no pre-life waiting area where souls are desperate to have a go at life and they feel disappointed if they don't get a chance. That's not happening. So it's an asymmetrical equation. You don't breed, nobody's disadvantaged. You do breed, you create a new potential for suffering in a creature that otherwise would not have cared about its non-existence. But yeah, so nihilism is not the same or equatable to antinatalism at all. And I would say if a nihilist who thinks life is meaningless and there's no moral framework in the universe, then why does it matter to procreate? Just throw this shit against the wall and see what happens, because it doesn't mean anything. That might not come out in the wash. I'm not sure, anybody's done a sort of survey on self-proclaimed nihilists and whether they have kids or not, I don't know. But regardless, there is that difference in the two viewpoints there. Nihilism, rejection of all moral framework, life is meaningless, whereas antinatalism says there is an inherent moral question when it comes to your decision whether or not to procreate. Yeah, I'd say. But it's a very interesting question that you raised there about this idea that nature itself might selectively might sort of favour selectively sort of getting rid of those who don't want to procreate because it doesn't serve life to perpetuate itself into the future. So it's interesting what you said there about life potentially favouring these systems of delusion that get people to get on board with the idea of furthering our existence into the future. Because of course life itself comes from a very basic function, a self-replicating molecule, DNA, whose base function and whose distinction from non-alive sort of matter is this capacity to consume and reproduce. And that's it. That's the basis of life, is a consuming and reproducing molecule. And it does not care about the collateral damage of suffering that occurs in sentient creatures that carry this molecule into the future. So while antinatalism might recognize this truth of the structure of life itself and reject the risk equation inherent in perpetuating life, it doesn't therefore follow that they wouldn't be grateful for their life whilst they're here. There is obviously a certain sort of schizophrenic quality to this. Whilst you can intellectually realize that you don't have you can't get consent to create somebody else. You can't, it's not that it's not fair for you to choose for another sentient creature to be thrust into existence, is a separate question from whether or not you can actually enjoy your life once you're here. Because of course, once you are here in existence, you're inherently tied to the continuation of your own existence. And of course, inherently you are motivated to make the most of it and be as comfortable and content as possible. I'm a very positive, happy person. I like having fun. There's lots of things I enjoy in life. I'm certainly not a depressive person. I've never been depressed in that way. And yet I recognize that, yeah, I cannot ethically justify thrusting a new creature into this risk equation that is life. So whilst I recognize that I can't get consent to create somebody, whilst I realize that it's kind of wrong for me to play roulette with somebody else's chips, essentially is what you're doing when you decide to create someone, I recognize that I find that impossible to ethically justify. As an already existing creature, I'm already invested in my own existence, or more accurately, addicted to my own existence, and therefore I'm motivated to perpetuate myself into the future and make the most of it and be as comfortable and happy as possible. Because the experience of life is built out of addictions. If we weren't addicted to the things that sustain us, then we would quickly lose all sort of will to exist, to perpetuate ourselves into the future. Ego comes into that as well, of course. You can't fathom a world without yourself, and you hold yourself, your own existence, to be the most important thing in your life. But of course, the self-preservation urge exists way down, all the way through the animal kingdom, the tree of life. So it is not something that is only associated with ego as we understand it to be in the sort of the intelligent humans. But yeah, there is this drive to exist that even functions below the level of mind, that is a sort of inherent hormonal or even just a basic drive of life to perpetuate itself. And it is only sort of through the evaluative process of an intellectual mind that you can then sort of analyze that structure into which we have been brought and decide whether or not it's something that you can sort of justify ethically. So yeah, again, bringing it back, antinatalism is centered on this ethical question and the reverence of, or rather, let's say reverence of suffering as the kernel of meaning in the universe. Whereas nihilism, of course, is the exact opposite. It rejects all moral frameworks and says life is meaningless. So that's just the only distinction. Otherwise, very interesting video.